Hello dear students, myself Bhavani Pentela, working as an assistant professor in Noida Institute of Engineering and Technology Pharmacy Institute. Today I am here to give the lecture on Pharmacology-I with the subject code BP404 on the 4th unit. Okay. In previous session we had discussed about the neurotransmitter on CNS and we had seen some important neurotransmitters like glycine and GABA. So, without any further delay we will see the rest of the receptors which are present on the particular unit. Okay. Before going to the glutamate neurotransmitter, what we had discussed in the previous session? In previous session, we had discussed the two important neurotransmitters. What are the two important neurotransmitters we had discussed in the previous lecture? We had discussed the inhibitory neurotransmitter like glycine and GABA neurotransmitter. In previous class, we had learned about what is any GABA neurotransmitter, how many types of receptors are there and what type of receptor it is, what are the agonist drugs for the particular type of receptor, what are the antagonist drugs and how it going to synthesized in your body and what are the action of a particular neurotransmitter. And after that we had learned about the glycine, what is the transporters for the glycine, there are the two transporters, glycine T1 transporter and glycine T2 transporter. So, we had studied about all these things in the previous class. Now, we will move to the important neurotransmitters like glutamate, serotonin and dopamine. In this session, in this class, we are going to cover the glutamate, dopamine and serotonin. Okay. So, first one is glutamate neurotransmitter. Which type of receptor it is? Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. Glutamate neurotransmitter is an excitatory neurotransmitter. If I am talking about the glutamate, it is an amino acid. Which type of amino acid? It is an excitatory amino acid of a neurotransmitter in CNS. The glutamate neurotransmitter is also called as a glutamic acid. So, what is the next name for glutamate neurotransmitter? Glutamic acid. So, what is the main role of this glutamate neurotransmitter in our body? The main role, the main function of the glutamate was cell production and protein synthesis. So, it will use the energy production, it will use the energy production in the cell and it will synthesize the proteins. These are the major important role of glutamate neurotransmitter in our body. One, it will synthesize the protein and second one, it will place an important role in cell energy protection. Okay. So, if you see this glutamate neurotransmitter has been released in excessive levels, what is going to happen? So, if the glutamate neurotransmitter already it is an excitatory neurotransmitter, it will excite the cell. If it has been, if the neurotransmitter has been released in excessive levels, then what is going to happen? If you had seen the excess of glutamate neurotransmitter which will lead to the neurological and mental disorders. So, these are the basic disadvantages with this neurotransmitter like glutamate when it has been released in the body in excessive levels, which is what is going to happen here. You can see the neurological and mental disorders. Okay. And if you see any disturbances of this glutamate neurotransmitter, so which may leads to the loss of memory. So, in the brain you can see that if there is any disturbances of this neurotransmitter like glutamate, which you can see the loss of memory also. So, excessive level of this neurotransmitter not only it will causes the mental disorder, it can causes the epilepsy also. The excess level of glutamate release which can leads to the epilepsy. So, how it will causes the epilepsy? The once it releases from the presynaptic neuron, first it will be stored in the synaptic vesicles. Once it receives the impulse from the synaptic vesicles, it will be released into the synaptic cleft. After released into the synaptic cleft, now it will go and bind to its receptors which are present on the postsynaptic neuron. So, what are the receptors? In previous lecture I had discussed about what are the receptors which are present for the glutamate. Mainly we having the two types of receptor named as AMPA receptor and second one is NMDA receptor. These are the two major important receptors for the glutamate. Once the glutamate neurotransmitter go and bind to its post junctional activity, it will shows its action like depolarization of a cell. How it will causes the depolarization? It will causes the depolarization by opening of sodium channel and calcium channel. Alright. So, now here we will see the glutamate neurotransmitter receptors. Okay, so what are the glutamate receptors? Mainly the receptors has been categorized into two types. One is inotropic receptor and second one is metabotropic receptors. Inotropic receptor, the name itself indicating inotropic, the ions will be moved from inside and outside. What about the metabotropic receptor? Metabotropic receptor sometimes you can call as an Z protein coupled receptor. Okay. So, for glutamate we having two types of receptors. What are the two types of of receptor, one is inotropic receptor and second one is metabotropic receptors. So, what are the two important inotropic receptors? The two important inotropic receptors are NMPA receptor and AMDA receptor. So, we will see the full name of NMDA receptor. So, what is an NMDA receptor? N-methyl D-aspartic acid, okay, N-methyl D-aspartic acid. And what is the full name of AMPA receptor? What is the full name here? Alpha amino 3-hydroxy 5-methyl 4-isoxazole propanoic acid, AMPA receptor and NMDA receptor. So, when the glutamate go and bind to the NMDA receptor, you can see the opening of calcium channel. When the glutamate go and bind to the AMPA receptor, there will be opening of sodium channel, right. Next, we will move to the metabotropic receptors. What are the metabotropic receptors? ACPD. Okay, AMPA and NMDA are the inotropic receptor and ACPD are the metabotropic receptor. What is the full name of ACPD? 1 amino, A stands for amino, C stands for cyclo, P stands for pentine and 3-dicarboxylic acid. 3-dicarboxylic acid. So, this is the full name of ACPD receptor. The ACPD receptor is a metabotropic receptor and it will shows its action by the IP3 pathway. So, these are the two types of receptors. What are the two types of receptors in the glutamate? We are having mainly two types of receptors like inotropic receptors and metabotropic receptors. The two receptors like AMPA receptor and NMDA receptor falls under inotropic receptor and last one ACPD receptor falls under metabotropic receptor. Okay. Now, we will see the synthesis of a glutamate neurotransmitter. So, if you see here glutamine, what is the starting material? What is the starting material for the synthesis of a glutamate neurotransmitter? Glutamine. Okay, it is an amino acid. Glutamine in the presence of glutamate synthase enzyme. With the presence of which enzyme? Glutamate synthase enzyme. The glutamine, with the help of glutamate synthase enzyme, it is going to convert the glutamate. After going to convert the glutamate, now you will see the glutamate decarboxylase with the help of this enzyme. Again, which enzyme it is? Glutamate decarboxylase enzyme. Now, this glutamate will be converted into GABA. Okay, and this with the help of B6, it will be converted into the succinyl semialdehyde and finally citric acid cycle will be seen here. And with the help of glutamate synthesis, again you can produces the glutamate. This is the simple step you can see with the synthesis of a glutamate. So, glutamine is a starting material. With the help of glutamate synthesis, you can produce the glutamate. Okay. So, next we will move to the serotonin neurotransmitter. So, what is a serotonin? Serotonin will be produced in your body by the hydroxylation and decarboxylation of tryptophan. Tryptophan is a starting material for the synthesis of or produce the serotonin neurotransmitter in your body. How it will be produced the serotonin? With the help of tryptophan by the hydroxylation and decarboxylation. Okay? And if you are talking about this serotonin, you can call the serotonin as an 5-hydroxytryptamine or in shortly you can call it as an 5-HT neurotransmitter, right? And it is a monoamino neurotransmitter. What type of neurotransmitter it is? Serotonin, what type of neurotransmitter? Yes, it is a monoamino neurotransmitter which involved in the transmission of nerve impulse. So, this is the main neurotransmitter which will shows the major action in your body. So, the major concentration, the high concentration of these serotonin receptors, these serotonin neurotransmitters present in ZIT and platelets, blood platelets. So, the higher concentration you can found the serotonin in blood platelets and ZIT. Okay. So, if I am talking about this serotonin, the serotonin molecule will go and bind to its serotonin receptor to produce the action. Either it can inhibit the cell or either it can excite the cell. Depending upon the type of receptor, what is going to go and bind to the receptor, it will elicit its action. So, depending upon the receptor, it can excite the cell or it can inhibit the cell. So, if I am talking about the important role, the serotonin will place an important role in schizophrenia, depression, and it will place a very important role in a temperature regulation. It can regulate the temperature, and this depression, schizophrenia, all these are the basic things, the very important role the serotonin can play very crucial role in our body. Okay. So, if I am talking about this serotonin, it may involved in the hypothalamic control, to release the pituitary hormones. So, the serotonin will helps to release the pituitary hormones. Not only it involved in the important role in the schizophrenia and depression, either it can regulate the temperature, it can regulate the body temperature. After apart from that, it can release the what type of hormones? Pituitary type of hormones. Okay, now we will see the synthesis of serotonin. So, how the serotonin has been synthesized? The starting material was a tryptophan. With the tryptophan hydroxylase, what is going to produce 5-hydroxytryptophan. With the 5-hydroxytryptophan, now we can synthesize the 5-hydroxytryptamine in the presence of tryptophan decarboxylase, 5-hydroxytryptophan decarboxylase. On the starting of one serotonin slide, I had explained you with the help of hydroxylase and with the help of decarboxylase you can synthesize the 5-HT. So, if you see here with the help of hydroxylase and with the help of decarboxylase, how we are going to synthesize the serotonin? If you see here, the starting material of an serotonin was tryptophan. The tryptophan now it will be converted into 5-HTP. What is mean by 5-HTP? 5-HTP is a 5-hydroxytryptophan. In how it will be converted into 5-hydroxytryptophan? In the presence of tryptophan hydroxylase enzyme. So, tryptophan hydroxylase enzyme will help the tryptophan to convert into the 5-hydroxytryptophan, and once it converted into the 5-hydroxytryptophan, this 5-hydroxytryptophan in the presence of some enzyme. What type of enzyme it is? 5-hydroxytryptophan decarboxylase enzyme. Now, it can produce or it can synthesize the 5-HT, which you can call as a serotonin or 5-hydroxytryptophan. Okay, now we will move to the receptors of an serotonin. So, we having mainly 7 types of receptors. So, the serotonin receptors is a big type of family receptors. Here you can see the 7 types of receptors. What are the 7 types of receptors? The 7 types of receptors are 5-HT1, 5-HT2, 5-HT3, 5-HT4, 5-HT5, 5-HT6, okay, and finally 5-HT7. So, we having 7 types, so 7 subtypes of serotonin receptors. All are Z protein coupled receptor except 5-HT3, okay, which I had specified here except 5-HT3, the rest all types of receptor are the Z protein coupled receptor. If I am talking about the T1, T2, T4, T5, T6 and T7, all these are the Z protein coupled receptor, and this 5-HT3 is an ion channel receptor. So, this is the important point you have to remember. The serotonin having the 7 subtypes of receptor from 5-HT1 to 5-HT7. Every receptor is an Z protein coupled receptor except 5-HT3. 5-HT3 receptor is an ion channel receptor. Okay, now we will see the what type of receptor it can function, what type of receptor when the serotonin go and bind to the specific receptor, what is the action you can see, what the pathway is going to generate here. Okay, so, if I am talking about this 5-HT3 receptor, which I had said you it is an inotropic receptors, and the rest of the receptors are Z protein coupled receptor, GPCR receptor. If I am talking about GPCR receptor, we can see mainly 2 pathways. What are the 2 pathways for the GPCR receptor? One is adenyl cyclase pathway and second one is phospholipase pathway. We are having 2 major pathways in the GPCR receptor. Okay, so, here I am saying about leave about 5-HT3 because it is an ion channel receptor. I am not talking about this type of receptor, and the rest of the receptors are the Z protein coupled receptor. It will function according to the GPCR pathways. So, GPCR pathways we having mainly 2 types of pathway. One is adenyl cyclase pathway and second one is phospholipase pathway. So, if you see about 5-HT1, so 5-HT1 it will decreases the cyclic AMP levels. So, it will act which type of pathway it is going to produce its action by the adenyl cyclase pathway. So, when the neurotransmitter go and bind to the 5-HT1 sub receptor, what is going to see here? It will decreases the cyclic AMP. If you here you can see the subtypes also. 5-HT receptor is further classified into 5-HT 5HT, 1A, 1B and 1C, even 5HT2 also has been classified into 5H, 2A, 2B. Well, there are various subtypes of receptors for this serotonin. Okay. So, if I am talking about this 5HT1 receptor, so what is the action? You can see here, it will decreases the cyclic AMP levels. What about 5HT2 receptor? It will increases the IP3 pathway. It will act by the phospholipase pathway for inositol phosphate. So, it will increases the inositol triphosphate. So, next one 5HT3, it is an ion channel receptor. When the serotonin bind to this 5HT3 receptor, there is going to open the ion channel because it is an ion channel receptor. Okay. And next one 5HT4 receptor, 5HT4 receptor will increases the cyclic AMP levels, and 5HT5 receptor its action was unknown, and when I am talking about the 5HT6 receptor, it will increases the cyclic AMP levels, and 5HT7 also will increases the cyclic AMP. So, in this slide you can notice some major things here. So, for only one type of receptor are the ion channel receptor, and the rest of type of receptors are the Z protein coupled receptor, and in this G protein coupled receptor except T2, okay, except T2, all the rest receptors are will shows its action by the adenyl cyclase pathway. So, if you see this one, it will decreases the cyclic AMP, it will increases the cyclic AMP, this also will increasing the cyclic AMP, this also will increasing the cyclic AMP. So, it shows its action by the adenyl cyclase pathway. So, only the one receptor 5HT2, it showing its action by the phospholipase pathway. So, it is an it will shows its action by increasing the inositol triphosphate levels. Okay. So, this one is action by the IP3 and the rest are the cyclic AMP levels. If I am talking about the first type of receptor, this is the only type of receptor which will decreases the cyclic AMP levels, and whatever the receptor related to the adenyl cyclase pathway, every receptor will increases the cyclic AMP levels. This is very much clear. So, we having 7 types of serotonin receptor, 5HT1C, 5HT7, all are Z protein coupled receptor except 5HT3, and if I am talking about 5HT2 receptor, it is an a phospholipase pathway, it will act, it will shows its action by the phospholipase pathway, and what about this rest of type of receptor, it will shows its action by the adenyl cyclase pathway. So, if I am talking about this adenyl cyclase pathway, only 5HT1 receptor will decreases the cyclic AMP levels, and the rest receptors like T4, T6 and T7 will increases the cyclic AMP levels. Okay. Next, we will see the some importance of a serotonin neurotransmitter. Serotonin neurotransmitter will place a very important role in the movements, bowel functions and movements. It will place a very important role in mood, anxiety, happiness, the happiness whatever produced by us, this is due to because of a serotonin receptor, the anxiety, the mood, whether we are in a good mood or sad mood, everything will be depend on the serotonin receptor. I had said to the serotonin, the most of the concentration, the higher concentration is present on the blood platelets, right. So, it can induce or it can produces the clot formation, it can produces the clot formation. So, if the serotonin levels has been decreased in your body, what is going to happen? It will increases the libido, and if the low serotonin levels in your body, which can causes the depression, right. This depression is also one of the major reasons due to the decrease in serotonin level of our body. For example, if the serotonin levels has been increased or the high serotonin levels has been is released in your body, what is going to happen? Osteoporosis, especially in bones. In bones, if there is increase in serotonin levels, you can see the osteoporosis. So, these are the important points with the serotonin neurotransmitter. And we will move to the next type of receptor was a dopamine receptor. Dopamine is especially it is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, primarily it is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So, if I am talking about this dopamine neurotransmitter, the dopamine is an important neurotransmitter which plays an important role in the body. If the dopamine levels has been decreased in your body, which can leads to the Parkinsonism disorder. The Parkinsonism disorder is mainly due to because of dopamine levels has been decreased, and the main important role of this dopamine was it will initiate the movements. The dopamine, what the dopamine role in our body? The dopamine role in our body, it will initiate the movements of a muscle, and it will plays a very important role in thinking, emotions and to motivation. All these things are the very important with the dopamine neurotransmitter. When the dopamine neurotransmitter released in your body, it will plays a very crucial role in thinking, emotions and in motivations. All these will be happen due to because of any dopamine neurotransmitter. And once the dopamine neurotransmitter has released in your body, and once it showed its action in your body, it have to terminate it from there, right? How it will be terminated from there? It will be terminated from there by the two types of enzymes. So, what are the two types of enzymes? These are the enzymes which will be metabolize the dopamine. So, what are the enzymes which will metabolize the dopamine? One is MAO and COMT. What is the full name of MAO? Monoamino oxidase enzyme, and second one is catecholamine O-methyl transferase. So, COMT and MAO are the main enzymes which will metabolize the dopamine levels to terminate its action from the site, right. So, if I am talking about the synthesis of a dopamine, so I had earlier previous lecture I had said you that every neurotransmitter in our body will be get synthesized. Okay, so as like that the dopamine also will be synthesized in our body. How the dopamine will be synthesized? The starting material was tyrosine. With the help of the tyrosine hydroxylase enzyme, first the tyrosine is going to form the L-dopa. Okay. How the tyrosine will be converted into L-dopa? With the help of tyrosine hydroxylase enzyme. And this tyrosine hydroxylase enzyme, when it converted into the L-dopa, with the help of dopa decarboxylase enzyme, it will be converted into dopamine. Okay. From tyrosine you can see the L-dopa, and L-dopa se aapka dopamine will be get synthesized with the presence of hydroxylase enzyme and dopa decarboxylase enzyme. Tyrosine hydroxylase enzyme helps to produce the L-dopa, and from L-dopa, dopa decarboxylase enzyme will synthesize the dopamine. And now this dopamine will stored in the synaptic vesicles, and it will elicit its action when it bind to the postsynaptic neuron in your body. Okay. Now, what are the receptors present for the dopamine? As like GABA, as like acetylcholine, adrenaline, glutamate, the same way the dopamine also having its own receptor. So, every neurotransmitter, every drug, every hormone, it having its own receptors. In the same way, the dopamine also having its own receptors. So, dopamine receptors has been classified into 5 types, namely D1 receptor, D2 receptor, D3 receptor, D4 receptor and D5 receptor. All these 5 types of dopamine receptors are Z protein coupled receptors. All are the Z protein coupled receptor. What is the major difference between the D1 receptor to D5 receptor? If I am talking about D1 and D5, the first receptor and last receptor, okay? The first receptor and the last receptor will stimulate the adenyl cyclase pathway. So, the D1 receptor of any dopamine and D5 receptor of any dopamine will stimulate the adenyl cyclase pathway, and the center of these 3 receptors D2, D3 and D4 which will inhibit the adenyl cyclase pathway. So, all the types of dopamine receptors are the GPCR receptors, all are the metabotropic receptors. The first receptor and the last receptor, namely D1 receptor and D5 receptor, it will shows its action by stimulate the adenyl cyclase pathway, and the D2 receptor, D3 receptor and D4 receptor, it will shows its action by inhibiting the adenyl cyclase pathway. Okay, so, now we will see the locations here. So, where the dopamine receptors has been located. If I am talking about the D1 receptor is located on the nigrostriatal tract and mesolimbic. So, where the D1 receptor has been located? The D1 receptor has been located in the nigrostriatal tract and mesolimbic area. So, what is the location of D2 receptor? D2 receptor will be located on heart and blood vessels. So, if I am talking about the heart, if you are talking about the heart के ऊपर आपका D2 receptors will be get present. So, D2 receptor will be located on the heart and even in the blood vessels as well. Okay. And what about the DT receptor? DT receptor is located on CNS. So, what is the location of DT receptor? DT receptor location was CNS. So, what is about the D4 receptor? D4 receptor will be located on the blood vessels and and specially it is located in the kidney, renal system. And if I am talking about D5 receptor is located on the hypothalamus. So, these are the locations of D1 receptor, D2 receptor, D3, D4 and D5. D1 is located on the mesolimbic, D2 receptor is located on heart and blood vessels, D3 is located on CNS, D4 is located in kidney and blood vessels, and D5 in the hypothalamus. Now, we will see the functions of an individual receptor. So, if you see here function, so D1, what is the function of D1 receptor? So, D1 receptor function was mainly volunteer movement, it will helps in volunteer movement and behavior. So, when the dopamine go and bind to the D1 receptor, it will function the voluntary movements and behavior. When the same dopamine go and bind to the D2 receptor, what is going to happen here? It will regulate the blood pressure, it will regulate the GI motility, it will regulate the renal function. Okay. And what about the Z3 receptor? Z3 receptor, when the dopamine go and bind to the Z3 receptor, it will shows the endocrine function. When the dopamine go and bind to the D4 receptor, it will shows the vasodilation. Why it shows the vasodilation, and this function is specifically for the renal system? Because D4 receptor is located on kidney and blood vessels. So, this is the reason when it go and bind to the blood vessels, it will causes the vasodilation. And what about D5 receptor? D5 receptor function, when the dopamine go and bind to its D5 receptor, it will involve in the pain process. So, these are the 5 types of receptors and their functions. In this session, we had studied about some important neurotransmitters like glutamate, serotonin and dopamine. Thank you so much.